Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor Trespassed on My Property and Tried to Kill Me with a Dangerous Snake." I know that from the title alone you might be thinking I am exaggerating something. I promise you that not only is this a true story, but the title doesn't even begin to explain how weird of an experience this was. Now I live in an area that, depending on who you are, you might see us and classify us as rednecks. Me and neighbor both live in an RV park next to each other. We also absolutely hate each other and get in pretty consistent arguments. I also can't really just move my RV somewhere else because the park is full of a lot more people recently living in the park. Nobody would switch with me because, well, nobody wanted to be next to neighbor if they could help it. Out of everyone, he was probably the loudest owner there and would get drunk almost every single night. While he was sober or drunk, though, he always wanted to start fights about anything he could think of. This time though, we were in an argument because he didn't where I started throwing out my garbage. He considered it his spot for whatever reason and decided he needed to create a huge stink about it. There are no designated spots either, so I really don't know what he was on about. All I know is that I started waking up to trash right by my door and I wasn't going to back down and let him get away with it. What followed was several days of retaliation of putting trash on each other's properties after asking him to stop and not getting anywhere with that. I really didn't think things would escalate to where they did from just that. I guess though that he really didn't like the idea of anyone trying to fight back against him, so he was going to do something crazy like the guy he is and trying to get me killed. I didn't even know what was going on at first though, because I saw him close to my RV and honestly thought he was putting more trash near it. Me. Get away from my home. Neighbor. That's not a nice way to talk to your neighbor. Me. What the hell are you doing over here? Neighbor. You'll see. He walked away and I went to look where he was to see if any more trash got dumped. It didn't seem like he did though, so I just brushed it off as him trying to piss me off and rile me up. I didn't think anything else of it, so I went back into my RV to try and relax for a while. Everything seemed pretty normal and then I saw something moving on my floor. It was a snake, and I will say right now that I am not a fan of snakes. I'm sure that he was right outside enjoying my screams of terror. Luckily, I was in arm's reach of my kitchen and was able to grab one of those big knives for cooking. The snake was looking at me like I was dinner and starting to jut out towards me. I swung the knife like a maniac, trying to keep it back so it couldn't bite me. I will admit that it was pure luck that the timing ended up with the knife slicing the snake and having it die right there on my floor. I didn't like this, but a dead rattlesnake on my floor was better than a live one trying to kill me. I knew right away that neighbor put him there, so I called the police and animal control. That was when they identified it as a rattlesnake, but there was something very odd about it. On its tail the rattle was missing, so I wasn't able to hear it coming towards me until it was right there. They say that it looked like it had been ripped right off of the snake. That would explain why it was so angry and wanting to attack though. Neighbor literally ripped the rattle off of the snake. Now I didn't have any solid proof that he was the one that did it, but me seeing him by my property right before gave them enough suspicion to go and talk to him. He actually was dumb enough to let them into his RV where they saw the rattlesnake's rattle just sitting there. He was arrested and taken away screaming that I set him up and he was innocent. It was clear though that the cops didn't believe him, and after a few more questions for me they left my RV as well, thankfully with the dead snake for evidence. I did have to go to court to give my side of the story of what happened so the judge could get a clear picture of what happened before anything else. So, I told him, and while I was sitting there listening to other things, I found out that he did in fact admit to ripping off the snake's rattle using his hands, a knife, and even his own teeth. Still, it probably would have only been a misdemeanor and gotten off easy if had a half-decent lawyer and seemed sorry. Obviously, that isn't what happened if you have been paying attention to what this guy was like. The entire time I was trying to recount the events he was interrupting me and having the judge warn him to stop. Before the entire thing was over, he was removed from the courtroom for not being able to shut his mouth and behave. It was kind of unbelievable that he was acting that way in front of the judge that was going to decide to send him away with a fine and warning or send him to criminal trial. Turns out at the end of the day they charged him for what was probably the highest counts they could get away with. Abuse of an animal, trespassing, and deadly conduct because of what the rattlesnake could have done if I didn't kill it first. The trial hasn't happened yet, but he is in custody because he has no money to pay for the bail in the meantime. His RV is still parked next to me, but since he can't pay for obvious reasons, it will probably get towed away soon to make room for someone that can pay. To think that all of this could have been avoided if he didn't throw a fit about me throwing my garbage in his spot and then turning up the fight to 100 by thinking releasing a snake to attack me was a good idea. I still have no idea where he got the snake because rattlesnakes aren't really native here, so it must have been the most thought out plan he ever came up with since he moved in next to me. The next story is titled, Constantly Rut and Tear Up Our Yard? Have fun with your flat tires and a fine. This isn't my story directly, but I was the roommate of the person who did this. Back when I was in my early 20s, I was rooming with my friend whose uncle was allowing us to live in his vacation home that he rarely used anymore. I didn't have to pay rent but had to buy things like toilet paper and paper towels and the like, which was nice. About 4 months pass of living at the house when the house for sale about a block over got sold and the new owners moved in. While I never knew the owners personally, I heard they were in their early 30s and the male in the relationship was an abusive dick. He regularly drove a giant Chevy truck with some of the biggest tires I've seen. I don't know the exact price, but they seemed like they were about a few hundred a piece, maybe $250 per. Now I can't remember what exactly happened, but I know about a week after those people moved in, my friend, who we'll call MF, complained to the new neighbor, who we'll call AD, about something rather small. This enraged AD and he started yelling at MF, and things soon got pretty heated and they left things off, basically saying "foo" to each other. A few days after this, one morning while retrieving the empty garbage bins, I noticed 2 rather large ruts in our front yard. I thought nothing of it other than some drunken idiot went off the road, probably taking the turn too early. After all, we were on the corner of the street. I told MF and we got some shovels, patted down the soil flat and put some grass seed over it. We thought that was that, but wouldn't you know it, it happened again about a week later. This time MF thought it wasn't an accident and thought AD was doing it to be a dick. He drove over to AD's house, and wouldn't you know it, his oversized illegal tires were covered with dirt. So MF goes up to his door and rings the doorbell. AD answers and MF politely says something along the lines of, "Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'm sorry, but can you please not rut my yard anymore?" To which AD says, "Yeah, whatever man," and slams the door in his face. Not knowing what else he could do, he just told me if he does it again, we'll call the cops. And as you can probably guess, AD does it again. We call the cops, but they say they can't prove it was him. Suggested we get some cameras so if it happens again we can have proof, and left. So we go to the nearest hardware store and pick up some cameras. Now, being rather poor at the time, we couldn't really get high-end quality cameras, but they were cameras nonetheless. There was 8 of them, and in half a day we got them installed and set up, all of them watching the street. About 2 or 3 days later, 2 ruts appear. We check the cameras and sure enough it was AD's truck. We call the cops, and they take a look at the feed. But apparently the quality of the footage was too low, and we didn't see the driver or the plates, when in reality I'm pretty sure the cops were just lazy and didn't want to deal with the paperwork. Fed up and rather pissed off but not discouraged, MF wanted revenge, and since he couldn't do it legally he had to take action himself. He thought about putting those spikes things cops use to stop car chases in our yard, but he was scared that was illegal, which I'm pretty sure it is. Instead he didn't cut the grass for weeks, letting it get super long. It was rutted a few times in this time span, but now he was ready to take action. Him being a fairly crafty person, put together some homemade sprinklers. He made it so when the top portion that dispensed the water had pressure put on it, it would give revealing a sharp metal spike, but until then wouldn't have any sharp parts exposed to avoid any possible legal repercussions. They looked like crap and were basically a couple pieces of metal spot welded together. I don't even think they worked. Hidden by the grass he put them out and the trap was set. He missed them the first time, but the second time he hit them, flattening 2 of his tires. Finally, after having our yard rutted probably 10 times, we finally got our revenge. He came to our door pissed and probably ready to knock out MF. He was demanding we pay for his tires. We called the cops, and they show up and were practically laughing in his face that he wanted us to pay. Instead he got slapped with a fine for destruction of private property, and on top of that they charged him another fine because his tires were offset too far and the mudflats were covering them enough or something like that. It didn't stop him from being a dick, but at least our yard was never rutted after that. The next story is titled, Car Stolen and Now Being Charged for Helping Police with Forensics. England. In the early hours of last Friday morning we, myself, my pregnant partner and 1-year-old daughter, were broken into while we were asleep, and one of our cars stolen. We called the police as it was happening, but no one came. We did a few posts on social media asking people to keep an eye out for it. Enormous stroke of luck, but a friend got in touch soon after on Friday morning approximately 7 a.m., so only a few hours after, having seen the posts on social media, to inform me that my car had been found outside her block of flats on the other side of town. I went over there to double check it was the right one, and to drive it home. I called the police at the same time to update them that the car we'd reported stolen had been found. They said they wanted to come and check it etc., which I said was fine. When they arrived, they said we were free to take it home if we want, but they'd appreciate it if they could keep hold of it because it might have forensic evidence in it. Considering we thought we'd never see it again only a few hours previous, we thought it wouldn't be too big a drama to try and do something helpful and let them borrow it for a few days. All seemed well and good. The insurance company called my partner and went through a few obligations we had to do now, which was all fine, but then pointed out we may have been charged for the removal of the car. Worried, I called the recovery company, who said that yes, we were on the line for the £150 recovery charge. I thought this was crazy, as the car wasn't recovered, we recovered it. The police may have needed to move it to conduct their investigation, but that's not the same as recovering it to a safe place. Nobody told us that there'd be a charge, or else I'd have had to decline. I simply cannot just afford £150 without notice like that. The Force's website explicitly says that cars recovered for evidence wouldn't be charged for removal. Since then, we've relentlessly been onto the police and police customer services, but frustratingly, no one is listening to us properly. Responses we are getting do not fit our situation. We've now taken to tweeting prominent members of the police force here, and the OPCC. We've had responses back from these, but the issue is the car is now ready to be collected and this issue is unresolved. Should we go and collect it, avoiding any additional storage charges, but more than likely ruining any chance of us seeing this £150 again? Or should we refuse until resolved, running up the risk of this getting more expensive? Am I right in thinking we aren't responsible for this cost? Update. Firstly, as advised by many, we paid for the charge and got the car back. Then, using advice from this sub, we spoke further with the complaints department, after the chief constable for the force stepped in, and they have confirmed we will be refunded the full amount next week. Terrific result, couldn't have done it without you. The next story is titled, "Just woken up to a camera on a 20-foot pole outside of our bedroom. What rights do I have in case it happens again and I need to call the police?" UK. As the title suggests, just woken up to a man, stood outside of our bedroom with a camera on a 20-foot pole photographing trains. I live in North Yorkshire, England. I can be a bit more specific than that if I need to be. So as a bit of background, we live in a block of flats that's directly on a road, opposite the main train line. This train line is used by normal passenger trains, but also by older diesels and steam trains, so we get our fair share of train spotters, and while annoying, I've never had to go and tell one to leave. My mum has told this specific person that he's welcome to stand in our garden to photograph trains. However, she was only aware of a handheld camera, not stuck to a pole. I went outside to confront him and asked him what he was doing. He told me that my mum, he obviously didn't know it was my mum at this time, gave him permission to photograph. I then told him that I didn't want him in there, so asked him to leave. He said that he may as well just cross the road and photograph there with his pole as it makes no difference. I said fine, I don't care so long as it's not my garden. He photographed the train that was arriving, and then packed up and left. I rang my mum to let her know what had happened, and she told me that she only gave him permission to film in the garden, she didn't know that he had a pole. She said that if she sees him again with his pole, she'll ask him to leave. I'm not particularly happy with him being there, either in the garden or on the street, as he only needed to turn his camera around, and he would have been looking directly into our bedroom, or pointed it up slightly and he'd be looking into our neighbors. Or turned it around slightly and he'd be looking into a flat with a small child in it. I'm not comfortable with someone with such a large sight range being able to look into houses or flats. This has upset my fiancé greatly, as we have no idea how long it was set up before we woke up, so God knows what he'd been filming beforehand. So, if this happens again, I'll be calling the police. What would my rights be if he 1. Is filming in our garden with the pole again? 2. Filming on the street with his pole outside our flat? Update. It happened again, the following day no less. Asked him to leave again and said I'd call the police if it happened a third time. Subsequently went down to the police station to ask for advice and they said if it happens again, they can move him along. Both if he's on the street or in our garden. So, thank you for everyone's help. The last story is titled, Landlord is having our flat repossessed. What do we do now? UK. My sister and I have been in our flat for about 2.5 years. Never missed a rent payment. We've often had issues with the landlord being completely useless. Not responding to maintenance requests, not signing contracts on time, not answering his phone, etc. We got a letter in the post today from a debt recovery company telling us they've started proceedings to recover possession of our flat due to non-payment of the mortgage. The hearing is on Monday. The estate agents, Purple Bricks, had zero knowledge of this. What do we do now? How long are we likely to have? Are we likely to get our deposit back? I've honestly never been so stressed in my life and would really appreciate any help and advice. Update. So, the court hearing for this was yesterday and the shit has well and truly hit the fan. I spoke to the estate agents, Purple Bricks, on Thursday who said they had not heard anything about this repossession and after I forwarded a photo of the letter, they said they'd look into it. I rang again Friday to ask the outcome and they told me that there is a clause in my tenancy agreement that says if the property goes into repossession, it voids our contract. He then also said that there's nothing, Purple Bricks, can do and that essentially my sister and I are on our own. Never mind that we've been model tenants for 2.5 years. So, onto the court hearing. My sister and I turned up and were introduced to the bank's representative who was incredibly surprised to see us. He told us he had no knowledge of tenants being in the property. He asked us a couple of questions. How long have we been there? Who's our agent? Etc. And then asked if we could give him some time. In the courtroom, we discovered that the landlord owes £150,000 in arrears, has ignored all previous attempts at contact, and here's the best bit, his mortgage contract doesn't allow tenants, which means that we have absolutely zero rights. The judge explained that as we were illegal tenants, the bank had the right to ask for us to vacate the property immediately. However, they gave us 28 days. The judge also said that if they'd asked for anything less, he'd have argued for the 28 days as it was completely out of our control. We've cancelled our direct debit with Purple Bricks and are going to use the rent payment towards a deposit somewhere else. PB have basically washed their hands of it all. They're completely glossing over the fact that they were negligent in checking the landlord's mortgage allowed tenants in the first place. So now begins the frantic search to find somewhere else that we can afford that will also allow pets. Thanks for listening.